In March of 1856, in the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia, a 14-year-old enslaved black girl named Sara Sutton was declared dead. 3 white men signed the record. A plantation doctor confirmed it. Her body was wrapped in linen. Her grave was dug before sunset. The white society of Chatham County considered the matter closed. But what none of them knew was this: Sara Sutton was not dead. By the end of that same year, 7 men would swear under oath they had seen her walking, breathing, speaking, weeks after they watched her buried. By 1860, 2 plantations would be abandoned, 1 preacher would lose his mind, and a sealed ledger would disappear from the county archive forever. Some said it was a miracle. Others said it was witchcraft. A few whispered something far worse. What really happened in that grave? And what did Sara Sutton do after she came back? That terrified everyone who learned the truth. Before we uncover the disturbing truth, subscribe, hit that bell, and comment your state below. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. March came to coastal Georgia like a slow bruise, darkening the edges of the world before anyone admitted it was there. The air stayed damp even when the sun shone. Spanish moss hung from live oaks like funeral cloth, and the marsh grass bent as if it listened for footsteps that never returned. In Chatham County, the land did not simply sit beneath a man's boots. It breathed. It shifted. It swallowed. Sutton Plantation lay a few miles beyond the last respectable road, where wagon wheels sank into mud that looked solid until it decided otherwise. The route to the main house narrowed into a causeway of packed earth, raised just enough to keep a carriage from drowning, most days. On either side, black water shivered with insects. Cypress knees rose like knuckles from the swamp, and at dusk the frogs began their chanting, a sound so steady it could make a sane man feel measured and judged. The Suttons did not grow cotton like the grand inland estates that boasted white fields under hot blue skies. They grew rice, and rice demanded a different kind of cruelty, patient, wet, methodical. The fields were not fields at all but shallow flooded squares, ditches and levees and gates that controlled water like a jailer controlled breath. The enslaved stood shin-deep, sometimes knee-deep, sometimes deeper, their legs numbed by cold mornings and their skin bitten raw by mosquitoes that carried fever like gossip. It was a place made to exhaust the body until the spirit stopped arguing. Above the rice flats, the big house sat on a slight rise, a pale structure with broad porches and tall windows meant to catch whatever breeze could be bribed out of the air. From a distance it looked calm, almost peaceful, like a church built for money instead of prayer. Up close, it revealed its true design: shutters thick enough to bar a window like a cell, doors wide enough for furniture and bodies, and floors polished so carefully a person could see themselves coming and going, as if the house insisted on witnessing every act committed inside it. Behind the main house, farther back where polite eyes did not linger, the quarters clustered in 2 uneven rows. Cabins of rough plank and patched clay, roofs weighted with stones, gaps stuffed with rags. Smoke leaked from chimneys that never drew properly, so the smell of pine resin and boiled cornmeal stayed trapped in the air. Children played where they could, in the thin spaces between labor and punishment, their laughter sharp and brief like birds startled into flight. On Sutton Plantation, people did not vanish in a dramatic way. There were no grand announcements, no public trials, no neat conclusions. A man might be seen at dawn, walking toward the fields with a hoe across his shoulder. By evening he was simply not counted in the line. A woman might cough for a week, then sleep one afternoon and not wake, her body carried out before the main house finished its supper. Sometimes there was a story, snake bite, fever, accident in the Watergate. More often there was nothing. And what the land took, it rarely returned. That was what the enslaved said in low voices when they thought the wind would not carry their words uphill. They said the swamp had a hunger older than any white man's deed. They said it kept bones like trophies. They said if you listened late at night, you could hear things moving in the reeds that were not animals. The whites heard those whispers too, though they pretended they did not. They had their own way of speaking about the same fear. They called the swamp unhealthy. They called the quarters superstitious. They called the dead inventory losses. And when the marsh mists rose thick enough to make the lantern light look weak, they shut their doors earlier and drank more whiskey than they admitted. It was into this breathing, swallowing country that Sara Sutton had grown, though she did not belong to the Sutton name except as property. She was 14 in the spring of 1856, small for her age, narrow-shouldered, with eyes that seemed too steady for a child. She moved quietly through the main house as a house servant, carrying water, folding linens, listening to conversations that were not meant for her. Her feet learned the boards that creaked and the ones that did not. Her hands learned how to be quick and invisible. Her face learned to show nothing at all. None of them suspected what she remembered. Sara had been born on the plantation, delivered in a cabin that smelled of smoke and blood and wet earth. Her mother had been sold downriver when Sara was still young enough to believe in promises, and after that the girl learned an early rule of survival: do not ask for what cannot be returned. She did not cry where others could see. She did not beg for scraps. She did not stare too long at the big house windows as if looking through them might reopen a lost door. She simply watched. From the main porch she could see the rice fields glinting like broken mirrors. From the rear steps she could see the quarters and the narrow paths cut through tall grass toward the swamp. From the upstairs landing, when she was sent to dust the guest rooms, she could see the whole property spread out like a map of ownership: fields, ditches, trees, cabins, fences, and the dark line of water beyond it all. Sometimes when the wind changed, the swamp smell pushed up to the house. Rot sweet as fruit left too long, mud, wet wood, and something metallic beneath it, like old pennies held in a closed fist. Sara would pause with a rag in her hand and breathe it in as if her body recognized something her mind could not name. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that the land had already marked her. Not with a bruise, not with a scar, but with a future. In the weeks ahead, the plantation ledger would record her death as neatly as it recorded rice yields and salt purchases. 3 white men would sign their names with calm hands. A doctor would speak with the certainty of science. A grave would be dug before sunset. And the swamp, watching from the edges, would wait. Because Sutton Plantation was not just a place where people labored and suffered and died. It was a place where secrets found fertile ground. It was a place that kept what it touched. And in March of 1856, a quiet girl named Sara Sutton walked its paths as if she had all the time in the world, unaware that time was already closing around her like earth thrown onto a coffin lid. By the time spring settled fully over Sutton Plantation, everyone believed they understood Sara Sutton. That belief, thin as it was, made her dangerous. To the overseer, she was forgettable. Quiet hands, lowered eyes, no tendency toward defiance. He noticed her only when she failed to appear, which almost never happened. To Miss Eleanor Sutton, the mistress of the house, Sara was a convenience, small enough to move unnoticed through narrow halls, obedient enough to trust with linens and silver, young enough to correct if she became troublesome. To Dr. Thomas Wainwright, who visited the plantation with increasing regularity, Sara was not a person at all but a shape in the periphery of his vision, a girl-shaped silence that belonged to the furniture. Among the enslaved, however, she was known by a different measure. They called her the girl who listened too closely. It was not that she eavesdropped in any obvious way. She did not press herself against doors or linger in hallways without cause. She learned instead how to become part of the room. When Miss Eleanor spoke of finances with her sister from Charleston, Sara stood at the sideboard polishing already clean silver, her eyes on the metal, her ears open. When Dr. Wainwright discussed fevers and constitution, over supper, she refilled glasses and cleared plates at the exact moments the men leaned back and grew careless with their words. None of them noticed the way her hands stilled when something mattered. She learned which illnesses frightened white people and which they dismissed. She learned how quickly a person could be pronounced dead if the right authority spoke with enough confidence. She learned that records were treated as truth even when bodies contradicted them. She learned, above all, that certainty was often just habit dressed up as knowledge. Down in the quarters, old Martha Gray watched the girl with eyes that missed very little. Martha had been born before the turn of the century, or so she claimed, and had lived long enough to see 4 masters die while she remained. Her back was bent and her hair gone white as ash, but her mind moved with a sharpness that unsettled people. She knew roots and leaves, knew how long a fever could burn without killing, knew how breath could fade and return if given time and the right coaxing. She also knew danger when she saw it. "Girl," she said one evening as Sara passed her cabin with a bucket of water balanced easily against her hip. "You keep your ears closed so tight they gone hear too much." Sara stopped, careful to stand where no one from the main house could see her. "I don't hear nothing, Miss Martha." Martha's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "That's what scares me." Sara did not ask what she meant. She had learned that questions invited answers she might not be ready to carry. Instead, she handed Martha the bucket and waited while the older woman dipped a gourd and drank. "You been in the house all day?" Martha asked. "Yes'm." "Doctor there again?" "Yes'm." Martha nodded slowly. "He talk about death like it a thing he can point to." Sara's eyes flicked up for a moment, then back down. "He talk like he know it. That don't mean he do." What Sara did not say, what she did not yet understand herself, was that she had begun to feel a strange familiarity with the subject. Not fear. Not curiosity. Something closer to recognition. At night, lying on her pallet in the corner of the cabin she shared with two other girls, she dreamed of water pressing against her chest. Not drowning exactly. Holding. Waiting. She dreamed of counting heartbeats that slowed until she could no longer tell if they were her own or the swamp's. She woke without screaming, without sweat, her breath calm as if she had merely stepped out of a room and back again. She told no one. In the big house, Miss Eleanor Sutton sat at her escritoire and tallied expenses with neat, decisive strokes. She was a practical woman who kept meticulous records and seemed more interested in profit margins than social climbing. Her marriage had given her land and responsibility, not affection, and she carried both with a tight-lipped competence. When she thought of the enslaved, she thought in columns. Numbers worked, numbers lost, numbers replaced. Sara's name appeared there like any other. A line. A value. If Miss Eleanor noticed the girl's pallor in late March, she dismissed it as laziness or the lingering damp. When Sara paused once on the stairs, fingers tightening around the banister as if the house tilted beneath her, Miss Eleanor's voice cut cleanly through the moment. Do not dawdle. I won't, ma'am. Sara straightened and continued upward, though a faint ringing had begun in her ears, the world narrowing as if viewed through a long tunnel. She reached the landing and steadied herself against the wall, breathing carefully, counting in her head the way Martha had once shown her. Down below, Dr. Wainwright laughed at something the master said, his voice confident, assured. He had seen death often enough to believe it always announced itself clearly. He trusted the signs he had been taught. He trusted his own judgment. What he did not know, what none of them knew, was that Sara Sutton's body was already practicing how to disappear. Not vanish. Not flee. But pause. And on Sutton Plantation, pauses were often mistaken for endings. The morning Sara Sutton collapsed, the air lay heavy over Sutton Plantation, thick enough to taste. Dawn had come pale and uncertain, the sun rising behind a veil of mist that refused to burn away. The rice fields shimmered like dull glass, and the frogs had not yet stopped calling, their voices overlapping as if arguing over something no one else could hear. Sara had risen before the bell as she always did. She washed her face at the pump, the water cold enough to sting, and tied her hair back with a strip of cloth worn soft by years of use. Her hands did not shake. Her breathing felt normal. If anything, she felt lighter than usual, as if some quiet weight had been lifted from her chest during the night. By mid-morning, that lightness had turned strange. She was carrying a tray from the kitchen to the dining room when the floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Not spin, tilt, slow and deliberate, like the house itself was leaning to inspect her more closely. The silverware rattled faintly. Her vision narrowed. Sound stretched and warped, Miss Eleanor's voice drifting from somewhere far away. Sara. Sara tried to answer. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. The tray slipped from her hands and struck the floor with a sharp clatter that echoed through the hall. Then her knees folded and she was on the boards, her cheek pressed against cool wood, the world dimming at the edges. They gathered around her quickly. Too quickly. Miss Eleanor stood over her, skirts gathered back, annoyance flickering before concern replaced it. What is this? She demanded, though no one had yet spoken. Sara's body jerked once, a sharp movement that startled the others, then went still. Her chest rose and fell so faintly it was hard to tell if it moved at all. Fetch the doctor, Miss Eleanor said. Now. Dr. Thomas Wainwright arrived within the hour, his horse lathered, his coat already damp with sweat. He knelt beside Sara where she had been carried to the side room, fingers pressing at her wrist, then her neck. His brow furrowed, not with alarm but with irritation, as if the body beneath his hands were failing to perform correctly. She has a fever, he announced after a moment. Likely swamp ague. It is common this time of year. She was fine this morning, Miss Eleanor said. So they always are until they are not. He opened his bag, withdrew a vial, and held it up to the light. Her pulse is weak, breathing shallow. She needs rest and bleeding. At the word, Sara's eyelids fluttered. For an instant, just one, her eyes opened. Not wide, not frightened. Simply open as if she were checking something. Dr. Wainwright did not notice. Martha Gray, summoned reluctantly from the quarters, stood at the doorway and watched. She did not cross the threshold. She did not speak. Her eyes moved from Sara's face to the doctor's hands, then to the girl's chest, rising and falling in a rhythm that did not match fear or sickness as Martha understood it. Her breath doing something strange, Martha said at last. Dr. Wainwright did not look up. Her breath is doing what breath does when the body is failing. That ain't failing, Martha said softly. That's holding. The doctor straightened, his patience thinning. You are mistaken. Martha met his gaze without flinching. I seen it before. You have seen superstition and called it knowledge, he replied. Step back. Miss Eleanor hesitated only a moment before nodding. Do as he says, Martha. Martha stepped back, but her eyes never left Sara. Not when the doctor applied his treatments. Not when the girl's skin grew clammy beneath his touch. Not when Sara's breathing slowed further, each inhale drawn out, each exhale barely a whisper. By late afternoon, the house had grown quiet around them. Servants moved carefully, voices lowered, as if sound itself might push the girl closer to whatever edge she balanced on. Dr. Wainwright sat nearby, watch in hand, counting seconds between breaths with a frown. 2, he murmured. 3, 4. At 6 he looked up. Sara's chest did not rise. Miss Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. Doctor? Wainwright leaned forward, ear close to Sara's lips. He waited. 1 second. 2, 3. He placed his fingers at her throat again, pressing harder this time. There, he said finally, though what he felt was faint enough to argue with. There is something. But minutes passed and the something faded. By early evening, the doctor's certainty returned, solid and unyielding. He straightened, closed his bag and wiped his hands on a cloth. She is gone. Miss Eleanor sank into a chair, breath shuddering out of her. So suddenly. Not sudden, he replied. Inevitably. Martha stepped forward without asking permission and knelt beside the pallet. She placed her hand over Sara's heart and closed her eyes. She stayed that way longer than was polite. Finally, she looked up. She ain't finished. Dr. Wainwright's voice hardened. You are wrong. Martha's gaze did not waver. You sure about that, sir? He met her stare, offended now, not uncertain. I have studied the body. I know the signs. What he did not know, what none of them knew, was that Sara Sutton's heart had not stopped. It had slowed to a place beyond his learning, beyond his instruments, beyond his certainty. And in that stillness, something inside the girl was listening. Night settled over Sutton Plantation with unnatural speed, as if the day had been pulled away rather than allowed to fade. Lanterns were lit in the main house, their yellow glow throwing long, uncertain shadows across the walls. Outside, the swamp answered with its own lights, cold flickers of fireflies and the pale sheen of moonlight on standing water. The frogs grew louder, their chorus swelling as though the land itself sensed a conclusion. Dr. Thomas Wainwright remained firm. She has been without breath for several minutes, he said, his voice steady, professional. There is no pulse I can reliably detect. The pupils no longer respond. Whatever agitation you believe you felt was residual. Martha Gray stood at the foot of the pallet, her hands folded in front of her, jaw set so tight it ached. She had seen bodies cool and stiffen. She had washed the dead and closed their eyes. This was not that. Not yet. But she also knew how power worked on Sutton Plantation, and power did not belong to truth. It belonged to authority. Miss Eleanor Sutton pressed her fingers into her temples, as if the pressure might reorder the world into something manageable. Then it must be done properly, she said. We cannot risk sickness. The quarters are already vulnerable. Wainwright nodded. She should be buried before morning. The words landed heavily in the room. Buried. The final act performed not out of reverence but efficiency. The kind of decision that left no room for doubt. Sara lay motionless between them, her face calm in a way that unsettled even those convinced she was gone. Her skin had cooled, yes, but not in the way death usually announced itself. Her lips were pale, her lashes dark against her cheeks. If not for the stillness, she might have been sleeping. Martha took one step forward. Let the night pass, she said quietly. Just the night. Miss Eleanor hesitated. It was brief, but it existed. Doctor? Wainwright shook his head. There is no purpose in delay. This is how contagion spreads, through sentiment. I will not be responsible for that. The mistress straightened, resolve returning like a well-fitted garment. Then we follow your advice. What none of them noticed was the faint twitch of Sara's fingers beneath the thin blanket. Not a grasp. Not a plea. Just a reflex like a body adjusting to cold. The enslaved men assigned to dig the grave worked by lantern light near the edge of the property, where the ground rose just enough to stay dry. The soil there was dense with roots, the earth dark and wet, clinging stubbornly to the shovel blades. No prayers were spoken. No names said aloud. They worked quickly because quick work was safer work, and because no one lingered long near fresh holes after sunset. Sara was wrapped in clean linen and carried out through the back of the house. Miss Eleanor watched from the porch, her face composed, her hands clasped tightly together. Dr. Wainwright supervised, his attention already shifting toward the paperwork that would follow. Martha trailed behind, far enough back to avoid reprimand, close enough to see the girl's face one last time. "Child," she whispered, so softly even the night might not hear. "If you can hear me, you hold on." Sara did not answer. The grave was shallow by necessity. Digging deeper meant fighting water, and water always won. They lowered the small body into the earth, the linen already darkening where it touched damp soil. One of the men hesitated, his hands tightening on the rope. "She don't look." "Finish it," the overseer snapped. Earth struck linen with a dull, final sound. Shovels moved faster after that, soil piling back into the hole until no white remained. The ground was tamped down, marked only by a slight mound and a wooden stake driven in at the head. No name. Just a number carved roughly with a knife. From the main house, Dr. Wainwright recorded the death in the plantation ledger. Sara Sutton. Female. 14. Cause fever. He wrote neatly, confidently, the ink dark and permanent. He signed his name. Miss Eleanor added hers beneath it. 3 men would sign before the night was over. Officially, the matter was settled. Yet as the lanterns were extinguished and the house grew quiet, the swamp did not. Wind stirred the reeds. Water shifted against mud. Somewhere beneath the newly turned earth, something changed, not dramatically, not violently, but decisively. Sara's chest did not rise. Then, slowly, impossibly, it did. What they did not know, what none of them would know until it was far too late, was that the land they trusted to keep its dead had made a different choice. And once Sutton Plantation slept, the waiting began. Rain came in the early hours, not a storm but a steady, soaking fall that pressed the night flat. It softened the edges of the world, blurred the paths, darkened the fresh mound until it looked no different from the surrounding earth. Water crept into every shallow place, finding its way through cracks and seams, answering gravity with patience. Beneath the ground, wrapped in linen already heavy with damp, Sara Sutton lay still. Time did not behave properly there. It did not move forward so much as circle, brushing against her and pulling away again. The pressure on her chest felt familiar, like the water in her dreams, firm but not crushing. Her thoughts drifted in fragments, sounds without sources, memories without sequence. The creak of floorboards. Martha's voice counting softly. The click of Dr. Wainwright's watch. Breath did not come easily. When it did come, it was thin and careful, a negotiation rather than a demand. Her body seemed to understand something her waking mind could not, that haste would betray her. Above her, the rain seeped through layers of soil and root. Cold spread along her skin, not sharp enough to wake panic, just present. The darkness was complete, not even the suggestion of light. There was no room to turn, no space to stretch. Only the close, absolute certainty of earth. Sara listened. She listened to the way sound traveled through ground, muted, distant, yet carrying weight. She listened to the water moving, to the small collapses of soil as the grave settled into itself. She listened to her own heart, slow and deliberate, beating with a rhythm that felt older than fear. Once her fingers twitched. Not in protest. In recognition. If she had screamed, no sound would have reached the surface. If she had fought, she would have wasted what little air remained. Somewhere in the quiet recesses of her mind, a certainty took hold. Stillness was not surrender. It was strategy. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was how long she remained there. Minutes bled into hours without distinction. Consciousness drifted in and out, each return marked by the same pressure, the same damp cold, the same steady insistence of the earth around her. At one point she thought she heard singing. Not a voice above ground, not human sound carried down, but something else. A low vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was not words. It was pattern. Rise and fall. Pull and release. The sound of something alive and vast, indifferent to the boundary between body and soil. Her heart slowed further. Above ground, Sutton Plantation slept fitfully. Miss Eleanor turned in her bed, dreaming of ledgers that would not balance. Dr. Wainwright woke once, convinced he had forgotten something, then reassured himself with the memory of his own certainty. The quarters lay quiet, though Martha Gray did not sleep at all. She sat by her small fire, counting breaths that were not hers, waiting for a sign she could not name. Just before dawn, the rain eased. Mist rose from the ground, thick and clinging, wrapping the plantation in a pale shroud. The grave looked untouched, peaceful even, as if it had been there for years. Beneath it, Sara's body shifted. It was not a sudden movement. Not a gasp. Her chest lifted by degrees, each breath drawing in damp air that tasted of iron and rot. Her fingers curled slowly, pressing against linen and then against the firm resistance of packed soil above her face. Panic flickered, sharp and brief. It threatened to tear through the careful stillness she had held. But something, memory, instinct, or the echo of Martha's voice, pressed it down. Hold, she thought, though the word did not form cleanly. Hold. She did not know how to dig. Her hands found roots instead, thin and fibrous, threading through the dirt like veins. She pulled at them gently, testing, learning how much effort they could bear without collapsing the space around her. Earth crumbled in small amounts, falling away from her mouth and nose just enough to allow breath. Above, a bird cried out as dawn broke. Sarah's awareness sharpened then, not into clarity but into purpose. She could not stay. The ground was already closing again, settling with the patience of something that expected to win eventually. But she also could not rush. Every movement had to be measured, every breath counted. What none of them knew, what the ledger could not record, was that the grave had not claimed her. It had taught her. When the first light reached the edge of the swamp, Martha Gray rose from her stool as if pulled by a rope. She took up her shawl and her small knife, her movements sure, her face set. "Lord," she murmured, not as a plea but a statement, "don't let me be wrong." The day was beginning. And somewhere beneath the earth, a girl who had been pronounced dead prepared to rise, quietly, carefully, into a world that had already decided she was gone. If anyone had asked Sara Sutton later what happened beneath the ground, she would not have been able to give them what they wanted. There was no clean story to tell. No straight line from death to breath. What existed there did not arrange itself into memory the way daylight did. It arrived instead as sensation. Cold first. Not the sharp cold of winter air, but a deep, soaking chill that pressed inward from every side, seeping through linen, skin, bone. It was the kind of cold that did not demand resistance. It waited for surrender. Sara did not know when she became aware of it, only that it had always been there once she noticed. Then wait. The earth did not crush her. It held her. The pressure was even, deliberate, like hands placed carefully on her chest and shoulders to keep her still. Panic tried to rise then, sudden and animal, clawing at the back of her throat. Her body tensed, breath hitching. And something inside her answered back. Slow. The thought was not a word exactly. It was instruction. Her chest stilled. The panic ebbed, confused by the lack of resistance. Her heart followed suit, easing into a pace so measured it felt almost separate from her will. Time lost its edges. Moments stretched until they thinned, until Sara could no longer tell whether she had been awake or dreaming, breathing or remembering how to breathe. Images surfaced and sank again without warning. The kitchen hearth. Martha's hands crushing leaves. Miss Eleanor's voice, tight with control. The sound of water moving through the rice gates, steady and indifferent. At some point, there was no way to mark when Sara understood that the air around her was different. Damp. Heavy. It did not rush into her lungs when she inhaled. It seeped. Each breath felt borrowed, taken carefully from a place that did not intend to give much. She learned to take less. Her breath shortened. Her body adjusted, not with effort but with acceptance. Muscles softened. The ache in her chest dulled, then faded. Her thoughts slowed until they no longer chased one another in circles. They drifted, touching and parting like objects in water. There was a moment, brief, distant, when she wondered if this was dying. If it was not what she had been taught to expect. There were no angels, no fire, no voices calling her name. There was only the ground, vast and enclosing, and the strange sense of being listened to. Not watched, not judged. Listened to. The sensation was subtle, easy to dismiss as imagination. A hum beneath everything else. A vibration that passed through her bones rather than her ears. It did not speak. It did not command. It simply existed, constant as the tide. Sara did not resist it. What she felt next was not fear but clarity. Her body, stripped of urgency, began to notice itself in new ways. The beat of her heart, each pulse spaced wide apart. The way her fingers rested against roots, thin and alive, pulsing faintly beneath her touch. The faint give of the soil above her face, compacted but not solid. She pressed one fingertip upward. The earth shifted barely. That was when understanding settled in, quiet and certain. The ground was not sealed. It was patient. It would hold her if she let it. It would also bury her completely if she fought it too soon. Stillness was not death. Stillness was language. Her awareness expanded in strange directions. She could not see, but she sensed movement above, vibrations carried through layers of soil. Footsteps passing far away. Water draining. The plantation waking and sleeping again while she remained between states, unnoticed and uncounted. At one point, her heart slowed so much she thought it might stop entirely. There was no alarm in that realization. Only curiosity. She waited, calm, suspended. Then it resumed, unhurried. What none of them knew, what Dr. Wainwright with all his training could not have imagined, was that Sarah's body had found a rhythm outside the narrow rules he trusted. Not stopped. Not failed. Adapted. Above her, rain began again, light at first, then heavier. The sound reached her as pressure changes, as faint collapses of soil shifting closer to her face. Cold water seeped through the linen, through her hair, into her mouth. She swallowed without panic, letting it pass. She was learning without being taught. When at last her fingers curled around a root thick enough to resist her pull, she understood what it meant to test without breaking. She tugged gently, feeling the earth respond. Not give way. Adjust. The grave did not open, but it listened. By the time the night began to thin toward morning, Sara Sutton was no longer simply waiting. She was preparing. Her movements grew deliberate, her pauses intentional. Each breath was placed carefully into the space she had made. She did not know how long she could last. She did not know who might come. But she knew this with a certainty deeper than fear. The ground had not taken her life. It had changed the terms under which she would keep it. And when she finally moved again, when her fingers pressed upward with purpose instead of instinct, it would not be as the girl they had buried. It would be as someone the land itself had taught to be patient. Martha Gray did not announce where she was going. On Sutton Plantation, an enslaved woman did not explain herself to the dark. She simply moved through it. Before she left the quarters, she banked her small fire until the coals glowed like a single red eye. She wrapped her shawl tight around her shoulders, not for warmth but for concealment, and slipped her knife into the fold at her waist. The blade was not meant for a fight. It was meant for roots, rope, and any knot the world tried to tighten around her. Outside, the air smelled of wet earth and stagnant water. The rain had stopped, but everything it touched still dripped, and the mist lay low, thick enough to hide a man's ankles. Somewhere far off, an owl called once and fell silent as if it too were listening. Martha walked without a lantern. She knew these paths. She knew where the ground held firm and where it turned treacherous, where cypress roots rose like traps and where mud could swallow a shoe in a single greedy gulp. She moved in the spaces between sounds, the brief lull between frogs, the pause between wind through reeds. She did not hurry because hurry made noise and noise invited attention. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that the plantation had other eyes awake besides hers. In the main house, Dr. Thomas Wainwright slept poorly. His dreams were full of ledgers and ink that smeared when he tried to read his own handwriting. At some point near midnight, he woke with a start, convinced he had forgotten something essential. He lay still and listened, then heard only the steady complaint of the swamp and the soft creak of the house settling. He told himself his unease was foolish. He had declared the girl dead. He had done what reason demanded. And yet, his hand drifted to the pocket where his watch lay, as if time itself might reassure him. Miss Eleanor Sutton slept with her jaw clenched, her hands folded tightly under her chin. In her dreams, she stood at the edge of a flooded field, watching a shadow move beneath the water. She could never see what it was, only that it was large and patient and somehow aware of her watching. When she woke, she did not remember the dream clearly, only the feeling it left behind like a damp cloth pressed to the face. Down near the quarters, no one saw Martha leave. They were used to her rising and moving at odd hours, used to her silence. Some believed she spoke to the land. Others believed the land spoke back. Most simply believed it was safer not to ask. Martha reached the burial ground just before the night began to soften at its edges. The mound of fresh earth looked darker than the surrounding soil, slick from rain, the wooden stake leaning slightly as if even it was tired of standing witness. The air here felt different, still watchful. The frogs had quieted as though the swamp had drawn in its breath. Martha knelt and placed her palm flat against the mound. She closed her eyes. She listened the way she had listened when she had delivered babies in cabins with no doctor, when she had sat beside fevered bodies and tried to decide whether the spirit was leaving or only wandering. She listened with her skin, with her bones, with the part of her that had survived too long to trust appearances. At first there was nothing. Then, so faint it could have been imagination, a tremor beneath her hand. Not a shift of soil. Not the movement of an animal. Something slower, rhythmic, a pulse. Martha's throat tightened. "Lord," she whispered, not pleading now but acknowledging. "You doing this?" The answer did not come in words. It came in certainty. She began to dig. She did not dig like a panicked woman. She dug like someone who knew panic wasted strength. Her hands moved first, scooping the top layer away gently so she would not collapse the earth inward. When roots resisted, she used her knife, sawing carefully. When the soil thickened, she used a broken shovel she had brought hidden beneath her shawl, the metal worn but serviceable. The work was slow and time moved strangely with it. Minutes stretched, then snapped back. Sweat gathered at her hairline despite the cool night. Mud packed beneath her nails. Her arms burned. She did not stop. Once she froze, hearing footsteps. A patroller? An overseer? She held her breath, pressed herself low, and waited. The sound passed at a distance. Just a raccoon in the brush, or perhaps a stray dog drawn by the scent of disturbed earth. In the mist, it was impossible to be sure. Martha resumed digging. As she neared the linen, the smell changed. Damp cloth, clay, and something sharper beneath, iron like old pennies. Her hands began to shake then, not from fear but from the enormity of what she was doing. If she was wrong, she would be punished for disturbing a grave. If she was right, she could not even name what right would cost. Her fingers found the linen at last. She peeled the soil away carefully, exposing the pale fabric in strips, like unwrapping a wound. Then she leaned down, pressed her ear close, and listened again. A breath. Thin. Slow. But there. Martha's eyes stung. She did not allow herself to cry. Tears made a person sloppy, and sloppiness got people killed. Sarah, she breathed. Child, you hear me? For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the linen shifted, just slightly, and a sound came, so small it might have been the earth settling. A whisper of air. Martha tore at the cloth enough to free the girl's face. Sarah's skin was cold, lips pale, eyes closed. But her chest lifted, then fell, measured and deliberate, as if the body had decided breathing was optional and chosen it anyway. Martha cupped Sarah's jaw and tilted her head gently, clearing mud from the corner of her mouth. Hold on, she murmured. Hold on. Don't you go back now. Sarah's eyelids fluttered. Not in fear. In recognition. What Martha did not know, what she would learn soon enough, was that the girl's gaze, when it opened, would not look like a child begging for life. It would look like someone returning with a message. And somewhere up at the main house, Dr. Wainwright's watch ticked on, counting seconds toward a dawn that would not arrive the same way it always had. Martha did not carry Sarah back through the quarters. She did not risk the eyes that would follow, the mouths that would whisper, the chain of questions that would travel faster than footsteps. On Sutton Plantation, information was more dangerous than any blade. It could be traded. It could be overheard. It could be used. So she took the swamp path instead. Sarah lay against Martha's shoulder like a bundle of wet reeds, light enough to make the older woman's stomach twist with anger. 14 years on that land and the girl still weighed like a child. Her skin was cold through the shawl. Not the cold of a dead body, but the cold of something pulled from water and kept too long in shadow. Sarah's breath came slow, measured, rationed, each inhale quiet as if she feared the air might refuse her. Martha moved quickly now, not reckless but urgent. The mist thickened as the night thinned, a pale veil turning trees into shapes and shapes into ghosts. Water sucked at Martha's shoes. Roots grabbed at her ankles. She ignored it all. Her arms burned, her back screamed, and still she went on. Half a mile into the swamp, where the land rose slightly and the cypress grew close together, there was an old hunting shack, more rumor than structure. Men used it in winter when they wanted to trap and drink far from the house. No one came in spring. The mosquitoes made sure of that. Martha pushed the warped door open with her shoulder and stepped inside. The shack smelled of old smoke, damp wood, and rust. A broken stool lay on its side. A coil of rope hung from a nail. In the corner, a clay pot sat cracked but still useful. Martha laid Sarah on a bed of moss she had prepared long ago, as if some part of her had always known she might need this place. Open your mouth, Martha said. Sarah's lips parted slightly. Her eyes remained closed, but her face did not contort with pain the way sick children usually did. There was no pleading in her expression. Only an odd calm, like she was listening to something far away and waiting for the right moment to answer. Martha poured a few drops of bitter tea between Sarah's lips. Swallow. A pause, long enough to make Martha's pulse jump, then a small movement in Sarah's throat. She swallowed. Again. Slower than normal, as though swallowing was something she had to remember. That's it, Martha murmured, more to herself than the girl. That's it. She lit a small fire, fed it carefully so the smoke stayed low and did not travel. She warmed water, washed the mud from Sarah's face and hair, and checked her hands for injury. The fingernails were split, packed with dirt. The fingertips were raw. But the hands opened and closed with steady control. It was the eyes that Martha watched most. When Sara finally opened them, it was not like waking. It was like arriving. Her gaze fixed on the low flame, unblinking. Pupils wide in the dim. She did not flinch from the smoke or the heat. She did not glance around the room with confusion. Instead, her eyes moved with slow certainty, fire, rope, door, Martha's face, taking inventory like a person counting what remained after a storm. Martha's mouth went dry. Sara? Sara looked at her. There was no terror there. There was something older. Where? Martha began, then stopped herself. The wrong question. Can you breathe? Sara drew a breath, held it for a beat too long, then released it. Her voice, when it came, was thin but steady. Yes. Martha waited, expecting tears, shaking, the ragged gasp of a child who had been buried alive. None came. You remember? Martha asked. Sara's eyes drifted to the wall, as if she could see through wood, through trees, through miles of mud back to the burial ground. Her lips moved slightly, forming words she did not yet speak. Then she looked back at Martha. I heard them, she said. Martha's skin prickled. Heard who? Sara's gaze lowered to her own hands, the dirt embedded beneath her nails. The men. The shovel. The earth. That's normal, Martha said quickly, though she did not believe it. You was trapped. You heard sound. Sara's expression did not change. Not just sound. Martha felt a chill crawl up her arms. What else, child? Sara's mouth tightened as if she were deciding how much truth could be spoken without breaking something. Finally, she said, The ground don't sleep. Martha swallowed. She had spent her life speaking to the land in her own way, begging it for medicines, bargaining with it for survival. She had never heard anyone speak back of it like this, like it was a mind. You was near death, Martha said, voice firm, insisting on sanity like a rope held tight. Folks see things when they near death. Sara turned her head slightly. The movement was slow, controlled, almost ceremonial. I was past it, she said. Then I came back. Martha stared at her, unable to stop herself. How? Sara's eyes lifted again, and for the first time there was something like emotion. Faint, not fear but certainty sharpened into steel. They buried me wrong, she whispered. The word struck Martha harder than any scream could have. Buried wrong. As if there was a right way to bury a living child. As if death itself had rules the Suttons had broken. Outside, a bird began to call. Dawn was near. Martha leaned closer, lowering her voice. Listen to me. You cannot be seen. Not now. Not ever. They think you dead. Sara's gaze didn't flicker. They want me dead. Yes, Martha said. And if they find you breathing, they will make it true. Sara inhaled slowly as if tasting those words. Then she said almost gently, They already did. Martha's throat tightened. No, child. You hear. You alive. Sara's eyes shifted to Martha's hands, calloused, scarred, trembling despite her strength. Alive, Sara repeated as if testing the word. Different. Martha did not know what to say to that. She busied herself with the tea, with the fire, with anything that gave her hands purpose. Because looking at Sara too long felt like staring into a doorway that should have stayed closed. What Martha did not know, what she would learn soon enough, was that keeping Sara hidden would not be enough. The impossible part was not that Sara had lived. The impossible part was what the girl had brought back with her. And once she could stand, once she could walk, the swamp would not be the only thing listening anymore. For 3 days, Sara Sutton did not leave the shack. Martha kept her there the way a woman might keep a flame alive in a storm, shielding it, feeding it, praying it did not draw the wrong eyes. She brought water in a clay jug, boiled greens when she could, and forced Sara to swallow broth even when the girl insisted she did not feel hunger the way she used to. Martha checked her pulse the way Dr. Wainwright had, fingers pressed at the wrist, then the neck. The beat was there, but it moved like something half asleep. Slow. Patient. As if time belonged to it now, not the other way around. You need to rest, Martha told her on the second night, when Sara sat upright, staring at the dark doorway like she expected the swamp to speak. I rested, Sara said. That ain't rest. That's dying. Sara's eyes remained fixed, unblinking. It wasn't. Martha did not argue with what she could not explain. She did what she had always done in a world that refused explanation. She planned around danger. But danger had its own plans. It began with a dog. A rangy hound from the patrollers' camp wandered off one afternoon, drawn by scent and stubbornness. It trotted down the swamp path with its nose low, tail stiff, and paused near the hunting shack. Martha heard it first, soft paws on damp ground, a snuffling sound at the edge of the door. She froze. Sara turned her head slowly as if the sound had been expected. The dog barked once. Martha reached for her knife, heart hammering. She could kill it, yes, but blood brought questions. She could scare it off, yes, but noise did the same. She held her breath and waited for the animal to lose interest. Instead, the dog whined. Then it backed away, hackles rising, and fled into the trees as if something had slapped it without touch. Martha stared into the doorway, confused. Sara's voice came low. It smelled it. Smelled what? Sara did not answer. She pressed 2 fingers to her own throat, thoughtful. It don't like what it can't name. After that, Martha became stricter. No stepping outside, she warned. No leaving this place. Not for air, not for nothing. Sara watched her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. But on the 4th night, the swamp itself changed. The air grew warmer in a way that felt wrong for March, and the frogs quieted as if a hand had closed over their mouths. The fire burned low, and even its small crackles sounded loud. Martha dozed sitting up, exhausted, her back against the wall. Sara did not sleep. She stood at the doorway in the dark, her bare feet on damp wood, her face turned toward the trees as if she could see through them. Martha woke to the faintest sound, cloth shifting, and found Sara gone. Panic struck like a whip. Martha stumbled outside, calling in a whisper. Sara. Sara, come back. The mist was thick, turning her own hands into pale shapes when she lifted them. She heard nothing but the slow drip of water and her own breath, too loud, too fast. Then she saw her. Sara stood a few yards away at the edge of a narrow clearing, her posture straight, her head slightly tilted. She looked like a figure cut from shadow, except for her eyes, which caught the faintest light and held it. Sara, Martha hissed. Get back here. Sara did not move. I needed to know, she said, voice calm as if she were talking about the weather. Know what? If they still hear me. Martha grabbed her arm, pulling her back toward the shack. Sara's skin felt colder than the night air. You want to die for real? Martha whispered harshly. You want them to find you? Sara's gaze drifted past Martha's shoulder toward the direction of the plantation. They already looking. And she was right. Back at Sutton Plantation, talk had begun in the way all talk began there, quietly, in pieces, carried from mouth to mouth like contraband. A field hand named Isaac swore he saw Sara's shape near the rice gates at dusk, standing still as a post. He told his wife he must have imagined it, that grief played tricks. But the next day he avoided that path entirely, making excuses about snakes and bad footing. A kitchen girl claimed she heard Sara's voice near the smokehouse, humming a tune Sara's mother used to sing. The girl crossed herself and refused to fetch water alone after that. Then came the first white witness. It happened near the stables, where the overseer's nephew, young, drunk, careless, stumbled outside to relieve himself after midnight. He saw a figure near the tree line, pale in the moonlight, and called out with a laugh. Who's there? Come closer. The figure did not come closer. It stood still, head angled slightly, listening. The boy's laughter died in his throat. Later he would swear he felt something press against his chest, an invisible weight that made his breath vanish. He ran back to the house choking, claiming the swamp had reached for him. Dr. Wainwright dismissed it the next day. Drunken nonsense, he said, though he found himself touching the ledger in his bag more than once, as if the paper could anchor reality. Dead girls do not walk. Miss Eleanor Sutton did not laugh. She sat at her desk, hands clasped, staring at Sara's name on the page. Ink did not smudge. Records did not lie. And yet, she called for the overseer. Double the patrols, she said. I want men on the paths at night. I want the quarters watched. The overseer frowned. For what, ma'am? Miss Eleanor's voice sharpened. For trouble. For whispers. For anything that should not be. In the quarters, those orders landed like stones. People began to speak less and listen more. Doors stayed shut. Children were pulled close. Even the elders lowered their voices when they mentioned Sara, as if saying her name too loudly might summon her, or summon the men who would come hunting for her. And in the swamp shack, Sara sat by the low fire and stared into the flame as if it contained a map. Martha watched her, fear tightening around her ribs. Tell me the truth, Martha said finally. Why they seeing you? Sara lifted her eyes. They were calm, but something in them moved, deep and slow. I ain't trying to be seen, she said. But I'm still here. That don't make sense. Sara's voice dropped, soft as the mist. It do if the ground don't let go all the way. Martha felt her stomach twist. Outside, the first distant sound of dogs carried faintly through the trees, far off but coming. What Martha did not know, what she would learn soon enough, was that witnesses were not accidents. They were ripples. And once ripples started, the water never went still again. The dogs reached the edge of the swamp just before dawn. They did not come in a straight line. They never did. The hounds fanned outward, noses low, weaving through reeds and shallow water, their handlers following at a cautious distance. Lantern light bobbed between the trees like nervous stars. The sound of men's voices carried in fragments, orders half-whispered, curses muttered when boots sank too deep. Martha felt them before she heard them clearly. A pressure settled in her chest, the same way it had years ago when patrollers came looking for a man who never returned. She grabbed Sarah's arm. "We leaving. Now." Sara did not resist, but she did not rush either. She tilted her head, listening, not just to the dogs but to the ground beneath her feet. "They lost it," she said quietly. Martha shook her head. "A dog don't lose a scent like this." Sara stepped closer to the doorway, bare feet sinking slightly into the damp earth. She crouched and placed her palm flat against the ground. Her eyes closed. Martha's breath caught. "Don't do that." Sara did not answer. Outside, one of the hounds began to whine. Another barked once, sharp and confused, then fell silent. The men halted, lanterns swinging as they looked at one another. "What's wrong with him?" a voice called. The dogs pulled back, tails low, hackles raised. One refused to move forward at all, straining against its leash as if the ground ahead burned. Sara opened her eyes. "They can't follow me," she said. "Not here." Martha's fear turned cold and precise. "That don't mean they won't find me." Sara looked at her then, really looked. The calm in her face did not waver, but there was intent there now, sharp as a blade's edge. "I won't let them," Sara said. Martha recoiled slightly. "You ain't got the right." "I do," Sara interrupted gently. "They already took it from me." The words hung between them, heavy with truth. Before Martha could answer, a new voice cut through the swamp air, closer now, unmistakable. "Call out," Dr. Thomas Wainwright said. "Whoever is out there, make yourself known." Martha's blood went cold. "He shouldn't be here," she whispered. "This ain't his work." Sara's gaze shifted toward the sound. "It is now." They moved together through the trees, keeping to the deeper shadows, until the swamp thinned enough for lantern light to reach them clearly. Dr. Wainwright stood near the front, his coat muddy, his expression strained with irritation and something dangerously close to doubt. Behind him were 3 armed men and the overseer, his jaw clenched tight. "Doctor," Martha said before she could stop herself. He turned, startled. "Martha, what are you doing out here?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The lie she needed had not arrived. Sara stepped forward. The lantern light touched her face, pale and unmistakable. For a moment no one spoke. Dr. Wainwright's eyes fixed on her as if his mind refused to supply the correct meaning for what he saw. His mouth opened slightly. He closed it. He took one step closer. "That's not possible," he said. Sara stood still. She did not bow her head. She did not avert her eyes. "You signed my name," she said. "You said I was done." The overseer swore. One of the men crossed himself. Wainwright's voice trembled despite himself. "You are dead." Sara shook her head slowly. "You buried me. That is the same thing." "No," she said. "It ain't." Wainwright's breathing quickened. He reached into his coat and pulled out his watch, flipping it open with shaking fingers as if time itself might intervene. "I examined you," he said. There was no pulse, no breath. The signs were clear. "You didn't wait," Sara replied. "You don't know how long a body can hold on. That is superstition." Sara's gaze hardened. "Then why you scared?" The word struck him like a slap. "I am not." "You hear it too," she said, lowering her voice. "The ground. It don't forget." The men shifted uneasily. One of them backed away a step without realizing it. Wainwright's composure fractured. "This is madness. Martha, whatever trick this is, whatever deception, you will answer for it." Martha found her voice at last. "You answer first," she said. "You answer why you so quick to close the book." Wainwright's eyes flicked to the others. "This ends now," he said sharply. "She comes with us." Sara did not move. The dogs whined again, pulling hard at their leashes, refusing to come closer. Wainwright stepped forward alone, lantern raised. "Girl," he said, forcing authority back into his tone. "You are not what you think you are." Sara inhaled slowly. Then she exhaled. The air around them changed. It was subtle at first, a pressure shift, a tightening that made breathing require effort. Wainwright faltered, his lantern dipping as he grabbed at his chest. He gasped. What is? Sara did not touch him. She simply stood there, eyes fixed on his, listening. The doctor dropped to one knee, choking, his watch clattering into the mud. The men shouted, rushing forward, but each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground resisted them. Enough, Martha cried. Sara, stop. Sara hesitated. For the first time, something like uncertainty crossed her face. She looked at Martha. I didn't mean to, she said. I just listened. The pressure eased. Wainwright collapsed fully, gasping for air, his face ashen. The men dragged him back, fear now fully eclipsing authority. Get him out of here, the overseer barked. Now. They retreated, half carrying, half dragging the doctor away, the dogs pulling eagerly at last to leave the swamp behind. When they were gone, silence rushed back in, thick and complete. Martha turned to Sara, her hands shaking. You could have killed him. Sara looked down at her own palms, as if surprised to find them empty. I know. The truth of that settled heavily between them. Back at the plantation, Dr. Wainwright would survive the night, but he would never again walk into the swamp. He would never again trust his own certainty the same way. And within a week, he would begin to erase records with a desperation that bordered on panic. Because now there was a living contradiction to his signature. And the girl who should not exist had been seen, clearly, undeniably, by men who would never forget the feeling of the ground turning against them. What none of them knew yet was that this confrontation was not the end. It was the point of no return. By the next morning, Sutton Plantation moved as if it were holding its breath. Dr. Thomas Wainwright did not come down for breakfast. When Miss Eleanor sent a servant to check on him, the boy returned pale and shaking, reporting that the doctor was awake but not right. He sat on the edge of the bed with his boots still on, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. His watch lay open on the nightstand, its ticking loud enough to irritate the room. Miss Eleanor went to him herself. You embarrassed yourself last night, she said, keeping her voice controlled. You frightened the men. Wainwright looked up slowly. His eyes were rimmed red, unfocused. She spoke. Yes, Miss Eleanor replied sharply. Martha's tricks. You know how. No, he interrupted. Not like that. His voice dropped. She knew what I would do before I did it. Miss Eleanor hesitated. She did not like hesitation in herself. You were overtired. I couldn't breathe, he said. There was no hand on me. No blade. The air simply refused. Silence stretched between them. You will say nothing of this, Miss Eleanor said finally. Not to anyone. Wainwright laughed once, a brittle sound. They have already seen her. They have seen something, Miss Eleanor corrected. And they will see what we tell them to see. That afternoon, Miss Eleanor ordered the overseer to gather the field hands. She stood on the porch while they assembled below, her posture composed, her expression severe. There has been foolish talk, she announced. Talk born of fear and idle minds. Let me be clear. The girl Sara Sutton died of fever. Her burial was proper. Any claim otherwise is a lie. She let her gaze move slowly over the crowd. Anyone found spreading stories will be punished. No one spoke. No one contradicted her. But silence did not mean belief. In the days that followed, changes came quietly, wrapped in paperwork and authority. Dr. Wainwright amended his own entries, adding notes about rapid decline, about unmistakable signs he claimed to have confirmed again after burial. The ledger pages grew crowded with ink, as if excess detail could smother doubt. Then one morning a page disappeared. Not torn. Removed. Wainwright noticed it immediately. Sara Sutton's line, name, age, cause of death, was gone, leaving behind a faint impression where the pen had pressed too hard. His hands shook as he closed the book. What have you done? He whispered, though no one was there to answer. By the end of the week, he would claim the page had been damaged by damp. By the end of the month, he would swear Sara Sutton's name had never been written at all. Miss Eleanor moved faster. She sold 2 parcels of land at the edge of the swamp, claiming they were unproductive. She dismissed 3 enslaved men from night patrol, transferring them to a neighboring plantation where questions would not follow them. She ordered the hunting shack burned to prevent vagrancy. The fire took it quickly. The structure collapsed in on itself, flames licking high enough to scorch nearby trees. Ash drifted into the swamp, settling on water that swallowed it without comment. Martha Gray watched from a distance, her jaw tight. That night, she did not return to her cabin. Neither did Sara. They left before dawn, slipping away along the water paths Martha knew better than memory. Sara moved without hesitation, her steps sure even where the ground shifted treacherously. She did not look back. "Where are we going?" Martha asked once they had put distance between themselves and the plantation. "Where they don't count," Sara replied. Martha nodded. That was answer enough. Back at Sutton Plantation, life attempted to resume its old rhythms. Rice gates opened and closed. Meals were served. Accounts were tallied. But something essential had been disturbed. The dogs refused to work the swamp edge. Men assigned to patrol those paths requested reassignment or fell suddenly ill. One claimed the ground felt soft underfoot, like it was breathing. Dr. Wainwright stopped riding out entirely. When he did leave the house, it was only to attend matters in town, and even then he avoided the river road. His confidence had thinned to something brittle, easily cracked. He drank more. He slept less. One evening, Miss Eleanor found him burning papers in the hearth. "Are you mad?" she demanded. "Those are records." "They were mistakes," he replied without looking up. "I am correcting them." Miss Eleanor watched the pages curl and blacken, the ink disappearing into ash. She said nothing. Some truths were safer destroyed. By the following year, Sutton Plantation stood half abandoned. Profits fell. Labor shortages mounted. The swamp crept closer as levees went unrepaired. Buyers whispered about sickness, about bad ground, about a place where order had failed. Miss Eleanor left for Charleston and did not return. Dr. Wainwright would die 3 years later, his health deteriorating rapidly. In his final days, he asked repeatedly to see the ledger, though no one could find it. He spoke of breathing soil and eyes in the dark. The nurse recorded his ravings with professional detachment. Officially, there was no mystery. No missing page. No girl returned from the dead. No error in judgment. Sara Sutton had died and that was that. And yet, years later, during Reconstruction, a clerk in Savannah would find a reference in an unrelated file. A note about a burial discrepancy at Sutton Plantation, cross-referenced to a page number that no longer existed. He would bring it to his supervisor, who would frown and tell him to forget it. Some things, after all, were not meant to be remembered. What none of them could erase, not fully, was the feeling that something had slipped through their hands. That a rule had been broken. That death, once so reliable, had failed to keep its promise. And somewhere beyond the reach of ledgers and patrols, a girl who should not exist continued to walk, breathing in a rhythm the ground itself had taught her, carrying a secret that no record could contain. Time did what it always did in Georgia. It covered things. By the 1870s, Sutton Plantation existed mostly as a cautionary reference, spoken of by surveyors who noted the poor drainage, by traders who remembered missed payments, by freed families who avoided the area without always knowing why. The rice fields returned to marsh. Levees collapsed and were not rebuilt. Cypress reclaimed the paths where wagons once passed. The big house sagged and finally surrendered to rot, its porch collapsing inward like a rib cage that could no longer hold itself upright. The land breathed easier. Martha Gray was never officially listed as missing. She simply ceased to appear in roles that were themselves growing unreliable. Some said she crossed into Florida. Others claimed she joined a settlement inland where names mattered less than skills. A woman answering her description was recorded years later as delivering a child during a flood, calm as stone while water rose around her knees. Another account placed her in a churchyard farther north, standing beside a young woman whose eyes unnerved the preacher enough that he shortened his sermon. Those stories were never verified. As for Sara Sutton, there were no confirmed records at all. That absence became its own kind of evidence. Freedmen along the coast told stories in the evenings, quiet ones shared only when children were close enough to learn but not close enough to repeat. They spoke of a girl who could stand in waist-deep water for hours without shivering. Of someone who calmed men in the grip of fever by sitting beside them and counting their breaths until the worst passed. Of a presence that unsettled dogs and made drunken men suddenly sober. "She don't harm," one old fisherman said years later. "But she don't belong either." White accounts were fewer and more fragmented. A former patroller claimed, late in life, that he once felt the ground turn heavy beneath his boots while chasing a rumor through the marsh. A physician in Savannah wrote privately of a patient who had survived an impossible burial and thereafter breathed at half the expected rate, pulse steady as a clock wound too tightly. No names were attached. Historians who stumbled across the Sutton reference argued for decades about what it might mean. Some suggested catalepsy, a rare but documented condition that mimicked death closely enough to fool untrained observers. Others pointed to premature burial as a known terror of the era, citing pamphlets and devices invented to prevent exactly such mistakes. Those explanations satisfied many. They did not explain the witnesses. They did not explain the dogs. They did not explain Dr. Wainwright's sudden collapse, or the erased ledger page, or why the plantation failed so completely afterward while neighboring estates survived the same climate and economy. And they did not explain why, in oral histories passed quietly through generations, Sara Sutton was never described as a ghost. She was described as a woman who listened. What she listened to, whether it was some altered rhythm of her own body, a deeper attunement to the land, or simply the truth that breath and death were not as absolute as men liked to believe, remained unresolved. Perhaps that was the point. Slavery depended on certainty, on categories, on ledgers that declared who lived, who labored, who died, and when. It relied on the belief that authority could name a thing and make it so. Sara Sutton broke that belief without lifting a hand. She revealed that a body could exist outside the neat borders of ownership and record, that a life pronounced finished might continue on different terms, that the land itself, worked, flooded, beaten into submission, could still choose to keep what it touched. Whether Sara's survival was miracle, mistake, or something history did not yet have language for, no one could say with confidence. The truth was buried as deliberately as she had been, layered under fear, profit, and the need to restore order. But the legacy remained. In places where the ground stayed damp long after rain, elders still warned children to walk carefully. Not because of snakes, not because of spirits, because the land remembers. And sometimes, it gives back what it was never meant to take. What do you think really happened to Sara Sutton? Was it a medical mystery history tried to forget? Or proof that some lives refused to end on someone else's terms? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more dark historical mysteries like this, stories buried on purpose and uncovered piece by piece, subscribe to Chronicles of Shadows. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story, and share this video with someone who believes history still has secrets worth listening to. These stories were erased for a reason. These voices still deserve to be heard.